All right, today let's talk about proxy models. Proxy models are a way to look at data through a filter. So you can change the sorting or visibility of items in a larger data model without actually changing the original data or without having the UI code and the views that look at this data know about the fact that this proxy model is in there. The idea of a proxy model is that you have complex UI code completely separated from complex model code. So whether you want to add sorting or search functions or hide certain file types in a file browser, a proxy model will always implement the behavior in such a way that when you're coding against a regular model and swap it out for a proxy model, you don't exactly notice what's going on. And you can have proxy models on top of proxy models or just the raw source model. The idea is that when you code a proxy model, you try and make sure that the other code doesn't need to know about that fact. So let's dive right into that and just import some Qt stuff to start and just build our basic template application. New application, sys.arc value, sys, build that one. Now we're going to create a Q main window application. With of course its own init. All right. But before diving too far into it, let's take a little detour and look at the Qt item models and the way that they relate to each other. So there's one final one I need to pull up here. The list view. I knew it would be mentioned in the documentation. So I'm looking at the C++ documentation mostly because it's more familiar to me. I know how to navigate this, but in general, it's not really different from Python. Like, the information is all there, and in my opinion, it's actually there in a better way compared to the Python PySide documentation. So it does take some getting used to reading this, but basically, when you have any function, it will say what it returns, and it will say what goes in there, the type of the thing that goes in there, and of course the meaning, the variable name. But it has some extra things like const and virtual, and the constructor is not called init, but it's the same name as the class, and there's a destructor which you don't have in Python. So there's some stuff that you don't care about. Same as void. Void just means it returns nothing, which is not the same as none, right? Yeah, it takes some mental processing to be able to read as fast, but I do recommend you bite the bullet because it's learning a little bit of C++ is never bad, but mostly learning how to navigate this documentation will help you out in the long run because this documentation is a lot better. It has a lot more cross references and better examples. And yeah, I don't know. I really dove into this head first, and there was no Python documentation when I was learning this. But in the long run, I really like knowing this because it's better. It's a better website compared to the Python version of the same data. Right, so the QList view actually looks at there's a family of view classes, right? So you have the table view, the tree view, the list view, and they all look at a model. And I think the model is actually coming from a base class called QAbstractItemView. So all of these different views, list view, table view, tree view, they will have a model. And that model is of type QAbstractItemModel. Now QAbstractItemModel is the data that we're looking at. Previously, we have used QStandardItemModel, which builds on top of that. And I never recommend you use any of these abstract classes. If the word abstract is in the name, it means you have to do a lot of work. And you need to know a lot about Qt's inner functionality and inner workings to actually make your own subclass. So always just build on top of QStandardItemModel and extend that. That's always going to be way easier. And the same with the view. Actually, I don't think you ever need to create your own view. There's the list view, the table view, the tree view. I don't know many other views. You might want some, in some special cases, you might want your custom view. I've used it to, for example, make a node graph. So I had a list view with all the nodes, but also an actual node graph with all the connections. And that yeah, you write your own widget that draws the Q standard item model in a specific, unique way. But besides that, this is the relationship. So you have all these different views and they all look at a Q abstract item model. And you build a Q standard item model, but there's also the proxy model. And first we have Q abstract proxy model. Again, abstract class, don't recommend you use it. But there's a few built-in ones. The identity proxy model is the best one if you want to make your own proxy model. And you'll see why you might want to do that later. But the sort filter proxy model is the one we're going to use today, because it enables having like a search function. So you can write some text and it will only show data in the model that matches that text or partially matches that text. And you also have sorting. So if you have a bunch of columns, then you can sort them in different ways, ascending, descending. And instead of shuffling the Q standard item model around by hand, you just use the sort filter proxy model and you connect the buttons and it just works. So you don't have to actually do any sorting yourself in code. I am gonna do something that's maybe a little bit bad, or at least to me it's bad. Like all these coding tutorials that talk about models and data need some data to test with. And you'll often find you have a list of people and their home address and their phone number and their favorite color or whatever. Now, I'm a game developer, so I'm going to try and do something more relatable to me, but it might still not really apply to you. So I'm sorry if this is kind of boring information to work with, but I'm going to create a new Scratch file, and it's just going to be a text file. I think that's in there. Yeah, there we go. And I'm just going to make a text file that contains some asset mapping. Like I have a 3D model and it is exported, like it's a Maya file and it's exported to a game engine as an FBX file. So I'm going to make a list of Maya files that are related to FBX files. So for example, I have my C drive and I have a source files folder, and in there I have the player character.maya file, MA. And then I'm going to use a semicolon to separate this, and we're going to read this file back. So I'm making the decisions here and I'll read it back the way I wrote it. And then after the semicolon, I'm going to say like C, and then my game project /asset /player character.fbx. So this would be one row in a table view where we relate one asset to the other. And the idea that I'm having here is this is something I do in the real world. I have right. I would normally not have a file. I would look through a folder and scan the subfolders and all the files in them. But for example, I have a fruit stand MA and there's no FBX file with the same name. And maybe I have no Maya file, but my game project actually has an asset that is called fruit store.fbx. So maybe somebody made a naming mistake there. That's something that happens, and this is a great way to look at the data. Like if we have a table that shows us this side is missing the FBX file and this side is missing the MA file, we can easily spot like similar files that are probably the same asset and investigate them further. So yeah, this is something I would definitely not read from a file, but collect from the hard drive in my day-to-day job, basically. And then I will copy this path and we're gonna just read that into a Q standard item model. And I'm just gonna create a function that's called create model. If you want to use the file system and just list files, you can do that as well. But I'm not sure what you would put on the second column, because the idea here is that I do have two columns with data, and sometimes one of the two columns will have an empty field. I'm just going to read through all these lines. I'm going to strip it to be sure, because I think the line would have a empty new line at the end. And then I'm going to split it on the semicolon. And well, I'm not going to make very good safe codes. I'm not going to check whether this line should contain the semicolon at all. I'm just going to assume that there's always one semicolon in every line. So I have the Maya file and the FBX file. And then this is what comes out. And then I'm going to create a Q standard item model. And then I'm going to create a Q standard item. And I actually don't want the whole file path to be there, even though I kept them kind of short, because I have source files in the C drive and not in some like nested My Documents folder. I still think it would be nice to just see the file name. So I'll just use the OS module, import OS, and that has os.path.basename, and that gives you the short name, but with the file extension. So this will just say like fruit_stand.ma and not the whole file path. I'll do the same for the other side. And then I'm going to create two QStandard items. And I'm going to add them to the model with append row. An append row, it can actually take a list of items. The autocomplete doesn't say that very clearly, but you can put either one item or just a list, and that's useful for tables mostly. And then we can return that model after we're done reading the file and processing it into a QStandard item model. So my main window will have a central widget, and that's just going to be a QTable view. I'm actually going to keep that in a variable. And then I'm going to create a model. I'm going to call it source model because we'll have a proxy, and the proxy has the source, and then we have the proxy model. It doesn't really matter that much, but this is the actual data. I think that should work. I'm not running with the right Python. Maybe this one? Yes. Oh, sorry, I need to call set central widget, of course. Right, so that's the initial setup with the FBX file on one side, the Maya file on the other side, and then some of them are missing. And now we're gonna add the proxy model. And well, first, one thing that's very useful is, of course, if you sort this data, which you can't do right now, but normally you would click on this and it would sort the data. You could easily bring all the empty items to the top or to the bottom. So if you're curious, like, oh, how many Maya files am I missing? You can just sort them and scroll through the list and find out where the Maya files start appearing. And then, you know, all these ones are empty. So I'm going to create a proxy model. And that proxy model needs a source model, which is why I named mine source model. So I want to use the same names as Qt does to ingrain them in my brain, but also why make it more confusing than you have to. And then instead of looking at the source model, we're just going to look at the proxy model. And that changes nothing, but it does just work. And now what we can do is we can start sorting stuff. We can say sort by column 0 in ascending order. And then the empty ones flow to the top for column 0. And if you sort by 1, then flow to the top on column 1. Of course, in the UI it says 1 and 2, but programmers start counting from zeros, human beings do not. So that's why Qt numbers them visibly in a different way than it actually does internally. And you can actually change these names as well. You can set the names of the columns to make it maybe less confusing. And you can even hide the rows as well, because I saw that the rows get mixed up based on the sorting, which to me is just ugly. So I could say my view has a horizontal header, no, a vertical header, and I can hide that. And my model, the source model, I reckon, I think we can say set header labels. Yeah, set horizontal header labels, and that would be a list of Maya and FBX, for example. And there we go. That's a little bit more humanly readable. Right, now let's look at the sort filter proxy model and see. Well, first of all, let's see if there's any nice examples with sorting. Right, the model has a set sorting enabled. That's pretty cool. So we'll do the same thing. And you can see, like, I got used to processing this information. So I can see a tree view. I'm going to assume that's a Q tree view. And then I see an arrow, set sorting enabled, true. And in my head, I just mapped that to tree view has a function called set sorting enabled. And in Python, that's a dot. and then it needs true, and our true starts with a capital T, theirs don't. That's okay. So I think we can now click on these buttons and it will sort our model. And I'm kind of curious myself if we really need the proxy model for that, or if it's just a very basic example that was already supported. So what happens if I set the source model? So now the proxy model goes unused, like it's not happening. Ah, okay, this already works. So ThinkQt is like secretly creating a proxy model behind the scenes to be able to do this. Yeah, this is the ID, and I think you can do a lot more on top of the proxy model. Like the proxy model has a sort role, for example, and you could sort by something other than the text that you're reading. So you could sort by some hidden data internally. And that's actually what I want to do next is when I create these QStandard items, I'm gonna put them into variables, and right, first let's get the same code back again. My item and pix item. Now we can change these items, and there's a set data function that allows you to set some custom information on these items. And here I'm gonna set the full file path. So we read the name, but the whole file path is in there in some form. I messed up that copy paste. There we go. And then, well, first we could sort by the file path, which might not make too much sense, but it could help. And what's more important is that we can search with our filter proxy model. It can also filter, so we can add a search field that actually allows us to type some text, and then we only see items that contain that text. And let's dive into that real quick. So instead of the central widget being a QTable view, I'm gonna make a QWidget. And I've been assigning everything to self out of habit. This means that if the class gets more complicated, you have access to all these other widgets. Like, I don't know, there's like a resize event or a key press event, and like Qt will tell you about stuff happening based on user input, and you could technically implement functions that do stuff based on a user input, and then you have access to all these widgets. But let's not go into that. Just wanted to say that this self is not necessary in pretty much every case except set central widget, because these widgets don't need to be stored inside the Python object, because I will never use them outside of this function. It's kind of like, yeah, self is kind of, you know, the variable that points to the class. So the window, every function of the window will know about the window itself, and this is the way you can like store additional data in there as well. Anyways, let's set a random widget. Let's create a vertical layout. Let's set the vertical layout on that widget, and then let's add a search field. And then let's add the view as well. And then let's set stretch 1, 1. That means I'm going to take the second widget, which is index 1, and make that one resizable, and the other one I will not be resizable. So the search field will not be resizable. And then search.textChange.connect. Actually, now we do need self, so that's great. Self.update search. And I'm going to create a function called update search inside of my app class. So this function now exists, and whenever the text changes, it will call this function. And I think it even says which the new text is, so that's useful. And then I need to remember what my proxy model is, so that I can say self.proxymodel.set filter. So there's different filters as well. I'm going to use wildcard, which means you can use the star character to like get, when you type half of a word, it will still match the whole word because it accepts the fact that there might be text before or after the thing you just searched for. And I'm gonna just put 2 stars in front and after the search text, so that we get, like, whenever we search something, we allow that to be in the middle, at the front, or at the back of any word. It doesn't have to be the complete word that we're looking for. I wonder if I forgot something. No, there we go. That finds the fruit stand. And so here we can also say the proxy model set search or set filter role. And then we can say qt.user role. Maybe it's qt user role plus 1. Let me check. Yeah, looks like it. So when you set data, you set it on a role, and I'm gonna set it on qt user role, which means this is my custom data. I am the user. And you can do +1 here if you have more than one custom bit of data you want to store inside of your data model. So when you create a model, you can store kind of like an infinite amount of extra bits of data in there, and they can be as complex as you want. Like, this is a file path, but it could be, it could be a dictionary, it could be a class, it could be anything. And now this item knows about the file path in the user role. So when we're searching, we can actually say we want to look at the user role, and we should be able to search for specific data based on the role. So here I'm looking for fruit, and it finds the word fruit in this row. And I could also look for C, and that is part of the file path. We don't see the file path anywhere, but it's stored inside of the model. And if you remember the text file, it actually does have this. One thing that I'm not sure we can configure is to make it search in all the columns. Like, you can say which columns should you search in, which would be 0 or 1 based on, if I look for fruit now, it finds it in the FBX column. Of course, it would be great to find both of them. And this is where you kind of want to make your own sort filter proxy model. So you can inherit from Q identity proxy model, which basically doesn't change anything, but it helps you out. Like, it works from the get-go. If you take the abstract proxy model, it actually doesn't work from the get-go. There's work you have to do for it to even start up properly. And with the identity proxy model, it just starts up properly and it just doesn't do anything yet. But that's a great way that you can only change the behavior that you want to change, instead of feed Qt the behavior that Qt wants from you as the user. And that's the thing with the abstract, any abstract class in Qt. It's in the manual, it will also say, like, to use this abstract class, you need to implement all these behaviors. And it's a pretty complex process and a long list of things that you need to create for Qt to be able to work with your version. And that's why they provide these existing versions that you can just kind of take and overwrite and extend upon. And the identity model is a great example of that, because it's the minimum viable product. Like, it doesn't do anything, but it does allow you to customize it without a lot of effort. That said, I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to have a quick look to see if I miss anything cool to show off in the manual. Right. I'm kind of curious if I can filter by every column, for example. Right, so this is cool for tree views, so you can set recursive filtering enabled, and that means that if you search for something, it finds like every node in the tree that matches that text. And then it will show the hierarchy up until the item that you are looking for. Which is kind of nice if you have like a file tree and you're looking for something, then it shows not only the file that is found, but also the folders above it, so you know actually where that thing is. Which is actually something I don't like about Windows. Like, in Windows, let's open an Explorer window, and let's go to C, program files, Autodesk, for example, and I want to look for foundation.lib, which is something inside of the Autodesk Maya folders. Like, it does print it at the bottom. But still, like, I would like to be able to go there now, and that's open file location, but then I lose my search results. and I can't just click here and copy the file path. There's some missing stuff there, to me at least. I would like to be able to see just the tree of folders and copy file paths or go to the folder above it, something like that. That's something you can do with the recursive filtering. Yeah, not too much customization here. Of course, it does kind of combine two features, and it's more of a minimum example of what you can do with the sort filter proxy model or proxy models in general. But yeah, they even show you that you can build on top of it. Like you can take the sort filter proxy model and build your own custom one instead of taking the identity model. You only like override a very minimal piece of behavior that only adds to this model what you want to have added. And I would need to read up on it a little bit, but I'm pretty sure that if we want to filter by every single column and not just one, that would be pretty trivial to implement, because we can take the base model and then like I think there's something like accepts row or something, and that's where you can, yeah, there you go. So you could implement this function and then instead of just filtering by one column, just filter by all of them. And if any of them have a hit, then you just then you just show the row, and else you don't. So you could lean into the existing behaviors of the sort filter proxy model. Filter accepts row could use the set filter key column and then call the base class the super filter accepts row. And you just change the key column for every column and call the super function for every column. And then you get one of them could be true, and then you return true, and else you return false. So it could be a very simple for loop that just uses super functions to get the behavior together that you want. And it could be fairly minimal. And I think that's really fun about Qt, but also about Python. Like I can go in and change any of this behavior, and it's very very free in what I'm allowed to change. Almost everything is modifiable. I can replace every function in Qt with my own code. That's a can of worms, and it can break. But when you know what you're doing, when you know how Qt works, that actually allows you to do really, really cool stuff. All right, I'll leave it at this for now. I might have a crack at that multiple column filter and share the code later, but I can't guarantee it. So thank you for watching.